How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Shrand.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
So good to hear that, Mark. It is so good to hear that. You know, it just sets the tone for everything. Here we are. How have you been, Mark? You doing well?
Great. How about you? Good.
I am doing great. Usually we banter a little bit, but we have such an amazing show tonight. We have not one, not two, not three, but four incredible guests. And so with that in mind, Mark, can you go right to it and introduce our guests for tonight, please?
Yeah, let's talk about our guests who have been here already, Dr. Joe, shall we?
Let's do that.
Let's start with Ross Melbourne, who's joined this time with his wife, Lois. They grew their software business to a global award-winning organization, chief technology officer and CEO, respectively. Now Lois and her storytelling brings to life Ross's deep understanding of the possibilities within artificial intelligence and robotics. Parenting and marriage have been the easy part of this equation. Ross's current work includes artificial intelligence and robotics. You can learn more about him at rossmelbourne.com. And for more information about Ross and Lois and their new book, which we're going to talk a lot about, Moral Code, you can visit moralcodethebook.com. And of course, Jason Shrand, you all know that last name. Jason is a mechanical engineering PhD student at Vanderbilt University, whose research focuses on designing surgical robots for treating prostate and renal cancers. Before Vanderbilt, he was a software engineer for Medtronic, where he wrote code for the Hugo robotic assisted surgery system. Currently, Jason is exploring how machine learning and computer vision can be used to automate subtasks of robotic surgical procedures, such as suturing and cauterization. And of course, Brianna Wu is a software engineer, a former congressional candidate, Massachusetts 8th District, and the executive director of Rebellion PAC. She hosts the show Rocket on Relay.fm, focused on technology and tech policy. And that is our group today, Dr. Joe.
Ooh, wow. Thank you, Mark. And welcome to all of you. I am so excited and delighted to have you here. So I want to start tonight talking about moral code. And Ross, you and I had a chance to chat another time. So I'm going to turn it over to Lois for a moment or two. Tell us a little bit about the book, the origins of it, how you guys came up with this. It's just such a wonderful sci-fi story.
Well, thank you. Moral Code is a science fiction, but it is the story of the AIs that we would like to have. If we could build an ethical framework that all AIs had to work within, which is what Kira, our protagonist, does, the most important thing that AI could do would be protecting children. If we could break the cycle of childhood trauma because kids didn't experience the trauma, that's a worthy thing to set off an AI to do. So that was the kind of the heart of Moral Code, and it comes from the sense of creating a ethical framework or a moral operating system that all AIs would need to be working within. But as often happens when technology is created, other people would like to use it in not so great ways. So you wind up with some struggles within the story to prevent the technology from getting in the wrong hands.
How did you guys come up with this idea?
Well, Ross gets the credit for the initial, what could AI do for us? What could we make the world better with? in AI, and it would be, ethical decisions and really having that protection for kids. And it kind of started as a if you could write a book, Ross, what would it be? I've written children's books, but I've never written a novel before. And this was just kind of a Sunday morning discussion. And it was something he had mentioned before, but we got into brainstorming the whole concept. And several hours later, we had an outline that changed a lot, but we spent the day just interacting and brainstorming and what if, and we've collaborated together for a couple decades in our software company, so that wasn't surprising. But I sat down and started writing, but he's the technology visionary for what the possibilities were, and then I'd have to translate that into a storyline.
So let me turn it over to you then, Ross. So where was this concept from, the idea, let's protect children with AI?
Yeah, I think it's from, where is the future taking us with AI and robotics? What if you could extrapolate all the technology forwards, play the tape forward, if you will? What is it going to become? And what is it you really want it to do? And I think that, all of us have this kind of wish. If we had, if we were a billionaire, what would we do? And a lot of people say we'd like to, end world hunger. We'd like to end child poverty, for instance. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that almost makes us feel bad because we know it's impossible. But what if it was possible? And allowed yourself to imagine a world where technology comes along that can really help every child and change humanity fundamentally forever. So that's really where the ideas came from. And, and Lois just kind of ran with the idea, and we worked on the kind of storyline together. And she just became, in my opinion, a brilliant novelist that really put together a great story. And we've got some great reviews so far, and even from the technology community. So that's been really very satisfying for both of us to see those reviews.
Before we move forward, how do people get the book?
The book's available where you can buy most books. The place I like to send people to the most is bookshop.org because it supports independent bookstores. So if you're buying online, that's a great place to go because they're giving back to independent bookstores. And if you order a lot of books, you might want to choose your favorite independent bookstore, and they get it as if they had sold the book to you. They get profits from that book.
Okay. Can you give us that name one more time for our listeners?
Yes, it's bookshop.org.
Okay, bookshop.org, place to get moral code. It's a really interesting idea. As a child psychiatrist, the idea of protecting children is very appealing to me. The dilemma is how, and how do we decide what protection means, and how do we decide how to get there? And I mean, there's a lot of nuance to this. So just with a brief overview, what does it really mean from your perspective to protect a child? Lois, you want to start with that?
I can tell you in our story, there's multiple layers to that process. Everything from, AIs can process artificial intelligence. They can process so much more data than people can. So we utilized Ellie, who is our starring AI in the storyline. She's doing things from drafting potential laws that could be passed because she can see where there's gaps. So she can do things that are that kind of very bureaucratic level, which is very important, but also to the extent of There is surveillance technology also involved in the book, where there are nanites that are being used to track down traffickers, sex traffickers, human traffickers. And the AIs are using that data to zero in on how do we bust these guys? How do we break that cycle? And unfortunately, they find that in doing that analysis, a lot of those traffickers were abused children themselves, and missing children and such from runaways, and have had these issues that are generational. So going back to the root of the problem, how do you find what caused these people to be the way that they are, to create these problems? And it's often abuse in the home. So there are both audible and physical ways where they intervene, because they can surveil and find where there are children that are in distress.
So I wanted to talk about this and turn it over to Brianna Wu. We've got Lois and Ross Melbourne, the authors of Moral Code, about artificial intelligence and how to protect children with that. But Brianna, you had some thoughts offline. Where do we go with this?
Well, just immediately, I want to tell a very quick story. Apple, just a few months ago, announced a policy for the iMessage feature, where basically it was to protect children. And what they were going to do is to go through every single photograph that came from your account. They were going to use AI on it, and they were going to basically alert parents if your child was either receiving images that seemed sexual in nature or receiving images that seemed sexual in nature, which makes sense at first blush, right? Like, we all want to protect children from predators. But when you start thinking through it, like, I grew up in a very religious right household. Imagine how that could be weaponized against a child that's gay and is exploring their sexuality, would inadvertently out them to their parents. So, when you start really thinking through these, I think for us as engineers, we get so focused on what can we do. We're not great at thinking about how what we build could be misused. So, when I'm hearing about this story, my first reaction is thinking about all the ways it could just go wrong. I mean, your data sets are going to be based on, our current information that's out there, which is, we don't live in a world with great data sets. It's often very racist and sexist and, misogynist in ways that is very hard to cleanse your data input. So kind of like, what are your thoughts on that with your story? Because that's the real impetus to putting something like this together.
That's great. Lois, Ross, how would you respond?
Yeah, I think the all those things you just mentioned are the current state of the art in artificial intelligence, and there's some terrible issues that you just mentioned, and so one of the reasons why we developed the story the way we did is to try and combat those very problems, and obviously the book is set in the future when. How are we going to solve these problems in the future where the data that you train AIs on is fundamentally biased because the world historically has had bias against certain parts of the population. So, how do you combat that? And that's really what the story is addressing. It's addressing, a solution to that problem that gradually happens, but it also imagines what happens when AI stops becoming just deep learning and machine learning and becomes more like human intelligence. And, so it's called generalized artificial intelligence, which nobody's achieved yet, where the AI can actually reason. So in your example, the AI would reason that this child, say 17-year-old, is exploring their sexuality, and notifying the parents is probably not appropriate. So again, it's what would you imagine an AI that had all of the knowledge and experience of Dr. Joe, for instance? You would expect Dr. Joe to react in a very proper manner in a way that would safeguard the child. So that's the future we're kind of imagining in the book, and then we try and take it even further than that. But I think it's the reason why the ethical decision making in AI is such a big topic right now, because there are real fears that people have.
Yeah, I just want to jump in.
Part of our story is we include the how do you define ethics, so that you can have the data set, et cetera. So within the story, we've created a global crowdsourcing of definitions of ethics and how do you train ethics, and tens of thousands of organizations have contributed their definition and their training, and that has been melded together and tried to come up with the core of what is ethical.
But isn't that word for word what Facebook
places.
is doing with their harassment policy online? Like what you just said is literally Facebook's ethics board when they decide if they're going to let, say transphobic material on the platform or election denying material on the platform. We have those policies today. Like that's literally what Facebook is doing. And it's not working out great when you crowdsource that. So, I think it's a little deeper than that.
But this is what's wonderful about this is that the moral code is beginning this discussion for people who are not aware of AI. Ross, you said something early on. I want to pitch it over to Jason on this. You said train AI. What does that mean? Jason, what does it mean to train artificial intelligence? I didn't even know that you could do that.
Yeah.
What is this?
Well, there are different types of AI. The one, I think the word training is most often used with is called supervised learning. And that's really where you give, maybe 1,000 images to a computer and you label them all, say, this is a picture of a car, look for patterns, really boil this down into numbers. And then if I give you another car, go back and look at that model that you created for yourself from those 1,000 pictures and tell us if this one matches. From there, it's like a probability game. You say, how close is this of a match to, this set of numbers that I think is a car versus this set of numbers that is not a car. But in order for the AI to do that, you need to first feed it a bunch of cars, and you need to tell it what's right and what's wrong. And for any supervised learning algorithm, that's really the approach there.
And is that the only way to train AI?
So there's also unsupervised learning, which has different applications. But the thing about unsupervised learning is it might detect patterns. So Facebook, for example, it could take a look at your social network and maybe recommend a friend, based on connections that it sees. But it can't classify, a result specifically and say, hey, this is definitely a friend. It can just look for patterns and make a suggestion. And usually, in a lot of applications, there will be like a data analyst trying to make sense of some of these patterns. But really, I think supervised learning is I think what maybe most people think of when they hear the term AI.
Yeah.
But there are other ways out there.
Yeah, the supervised learning is the vast majority of learning and of machine learning, and typically it's trained on enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of images, millions of images to detect objects, for instance. But then there's also the fact that the training happens in batch. The last time we were on, we talked about this technology from OpenAI called GPT-3, and Lois and I built a chatbot based on GPT-3. GPT-3 was trained as of October 2019, and so you can ask the GPT-3 questions, and it knows history up to that point. What really needs to happen for, in my opinion, and other people's opinion, for AI to become more generalized, more like humans, is we need continuous learning. Humans learn continuously, and there's a few technologies available today. which are considered artificial intelligence, which have continuous learning. And that's really where we've got to make a very big leap forward to get to continuous learning. And I think that there's a few books out there and a few organizations that are working on this, which is pretty exciting.
There was an interesting project a little while ago using reinforcement learning, which is another type, which is kind of like the reward system that the human brain uses. Actually, basically, in reinforcement learning, instead of giving something a million images up front, saying this is right and this is wrong, you basically give a robot a goal and say, just do what you want, try it. And let's say we're trying to get a robot to walk, and it will start moving some joints randomly and just start doing what it wants. And you then say, good robot or bad robot. You press a reward button or you press a punishment button. And then the robot will slowly learn over time that this behavior was good, this behavior was bad, and start to adjust its behavior. And you get some interesting results with that too. I saw one project where someone was trying to teach a remote control helicopter to fly straight and level, and it ended up doing so, but upside down. The blades were on the bottom, but it was still generating just enough lift, to keep it in one spot. It's something a human would never have thought to do, but there it was.
Wow.
Yeah, reinforcement learning has done some incredibly impressive things, like Go, for instance, that is a famous kind of experiment in that Google did with DeepMind, and they programmed with reinforcement learning an AI to play the game Go, and most experts believe that a machine could never beat the world champion at Go, and it did. It beat that world champion quite handily. In fact, I think there's a documentary out there you can watch about that, and it's fascinating. Yes, so reinforcement learning is very very helpful. The thing is, it takes millions of iterations, and with robotics, for instance, it's very, very difficult to get a robot to do something a million times so you can train the AI, because it's just a matter of physics. You just cannot physically have enough time to do that. And so that's a fascinating conversation between how you apply AI to robotics, and and there's a lot of buzz about that right now. Tesla's coming out with a humanoid robot. OpenAI has tried humanoid robotics before and has some very interesting results.
It's a wonderful concept, but how do we get there? And the data that is entered for the AI is critical. How do you decide what's right and what's wrong? I mean, how do you say this person's good, that person isn't, and then develop a moral code? Brianna, you had some thoughts on this offline.
Yeah, can I share a really quick story? This is a real life story about something that happened to me with AI going wrong. So Microsoft around, I think this was 2015, was really getting into deep learning and AI, and they wanted to bring forward a chatbot. So they spend millions of dollars and they developed this thing called Tay. Which is their state-of-the-art chatbot. This was before GPT-3. This was one of the predecessors for this. And they go and get all this information offline and ask the public to interact with Tay to help train it and teach it what to say. And this was in the middle of Gamergate. And what ended up happening is the public and the information that they were getting online was teaching this bot to deny the Holocaust, to say women didn't belong in engineering careers, to say some things so racist I'm not even going to repeat them here on the show. So here you say, oh, we want to crowdsource this open to the public. Well, Tay is a very good example of what happened when you crowdsource these choices to the public, to the point that Microsoft actually threw away millions of dollars saying we cannot ethically continue the development of this. So what I would love to talk about is, like, when it comes to deciding what is successful when you're competing two GANs against each other, when you are deciding a positive outcome, when you are deciding how to sanitize your data inputs. like who gets to make that call about what is good and bad, because that is what's going to train the artificial intelligence and determine what it ends up being.
Yeah, I mean, there's such nuance to this. Ross, you want to respond to that first, and then?
Yeah, I think that the OpenAI's GPT-3 is an interesting example of this because it's trained on a huge swatch of data from the internet, including a lot of chats and Reddit and enormous amount of information, and some of it is just not very good. It's all the things, all the bad things you can imagine. And so what's interesting is if you want to consume GPT-3, you have to have a contract with them, and part of that contract is you actually have to take the answer that GPT-3 gives back to you, and then you send it back to OpenAI with another API call, and that API call basically does that moral judgment on it. Is this a nice response, or is it something people would be offended by? And I don't know. That's kind of a black box. But basically what they're doing is they're trying to solve the problem that was just discussed. And so it's an ongoing issue. And I think that at least the attention has been drawn to it now. So engineers are trying their best to solve it. But I would say that what is the intention of things? Social media, the intention of the individuals contributing a lot of times is just attention. That's their reward function. Getting back to reinforcement learning, there's always a reward function, and that reward is attention. But if you ask people to crowdsource, what is right and wrong, then what you're doing, hopefully you're opening up to a large enough group that you can find a commonality. And I think that if you opened up, moral questions to a large enough population of people, you crowdsource it, you would get, you'd get the wisdom of crowds working, as you'd expect. I don't think you'd end up with something really bad. So I think that the reason why the things went off the rails before was just a limited kind of input.
Mm-hmm. And to make a story, to make the science fiction, we also wanted to educate people on the fact that bad data in, and that there is bias training. And, an example in the story is that the AI assumes that during a raid on a trafficking ring, a sex trafficking ring, that the woman that was in the room, that all of the women were victims. But once they started interviewing all of the people in the room, all but one woman said that one woman was one of the traffickers. And so that's one example of how there is a discussion about the AI had been trained on biased data. And so by trying to create a story for people that aren't, trained in the art of AI, it's we're trying to give, here are some of these examples, and here are some of the issues. And I share your concerns that just like with education systems of people, if you give them bad data, they come out with bad decisions. And it's critical that we focus on all elements of how do we make sure that information is good and that it is valid, and that is a very important part of all of this development that we start going forward. And we've got to get it right now, because this is the foundation of this technology that's going to permeate every part of our life.
So it's such an important discussion. So in the book, you're just sort of giving these examples of what could happen, what could go wrong. And you're right. I mean, it's all dependent on the data input. There's, in psychiatry and psychology, there's a really interesting story about a person whose family is hungry. And so somebody goes and steals food. Now, stealing is wrong, but feeding your family is not wrong. So how on earth do we come to terms with that? Jason, I mean, is there a way that we can get AI to manage that?
That's a good point. And I think it also comes down to what data you have as input. You could have a bunch of, let's say you have an AI that's trained on, that sees, look at all these good people following the law. Following the law is a thing that good people do. So therefore, stealing is wrong. And it might come to that conclusion. But if you gave it a different data set, the same AI, just trained on different data could very easily reach the other conclusion. Say, feeding your family is correct. And maybe there's a higher weight given to that than following the law. But the thing is, like, humans can think of all these arbitrary scenarios. We're really good at it. AI, at least as the technology is currently, if it comes up against something that it hasn't seen in its training data set, it just blows up. AI, at least right now, cannot improvise, which is, in the first chapter of your book, I don't want to say any spoilers, but you mentioned that some improvisation was needed to land a helicopter. And so the human had to take over. And I think that's, very illustrative of, the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So I guess one of my questions is, yes, one of the science fiction elements that we talked about is getting, this truth data, but who is it that says what's right and wrong? But let's imagine that there is a person, like someone meditating under a waterfall who's always making the moral decision. And everyone just goes to this hypothetical person, who's wise beyond years, and says, what do we do? You are the training data for this AI. How do you quantify that still? Even if you have the perfect, moral code, how do you actually get a computer to interpret it? You need to be able to put 2 and 2 together in any one of these infinite circumstances and collect data from all over the place and make inferences and make instinctive decisions to handle situations like the one you just talked about, where someone's stealing a loaf of bread to feed his family.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that is hard to imagine is the amount of data being captured being exponentially larger than it is today. The amount of things that happen in our regular lives in civilization, how much of civilization has been digitized? Like, for instance, every court in America over the last 5 years, every single case, everything that's been put for a jury or a judge, imagine all of that being captured and being put into an AI, machine learning today. I'm pretty sure that it would be able to, if you gave it the inputs of some of those cases, 20% of them, and say predict the outcome of those cases, it would probably get greater than 99.9% right because of the data. So that is one way. Today, you could you could ask the AI, this person stole to feed this family. What would a judge say? Most judges, you would assume they'd say, well, we're going to give you a suspended sentence or something, or it's community service, but we're not going to send you to jail because you did a good thing. You shouldn't have stolen. You should find some other way for the government to step in to feed these people. You'd imagine it would do basically what the legal system does today. And it begs the question, is the legal system, can it, scale enough to deal with everyone's problems? And I would say today it can't. So ultimately, we're going to be dealing with machines to help us with medicine, for instance. I think the Chinese will beat us to an AI that can cure people's diseases and help them. Whereas, and that comes down to privacy. Data privacy and personal privacy in China isn't what it is in the rest of the world, but they have access to enormous amount of medical data that they can build into an AI. I'm not sure if, as and when they'll do it, but that's my prediction.
Do you mind if I just tell one very quick anecdote that links directly on that story you were just telling about the criminal justice system? We have that today. That exists today. There's a major company that has an AI out that is actually mandated to help judges determine sentencing when people are found guilty on crimes. And one of the really big problems with that software, this isn't science fiction, this exists in our world today. They did an independent security audit on it, and they found that it was giving Black people 25% longer sentences than white people. And, just from a personal note, I've often been the engineer in the meeting that's like, how can this go wrong? It's not something I enjoy, but I really think we can't just hand wave these problems away. If we are telling the public that this future can exist, I think it's not enough for us to sit here and hand wave and say, well, we'll figure this out. We've really got to wrestle.
I've got to stop you there because we're not hand waving this.
Sure.
We've spent 4 years writing a book to try and educate the world on both, childhood trauma as well as what the future of AI can be and how we got to change it to make the world better. And so hand waving is not a part of this.
So Mark, before we go on, what do you think about this discussion?
I'm fascinated by the future, and I think it's moving really fast. You were starting to say, the lay person, the non-engineer, who's not involved in AI and the discussion every day. It's just could be a runaway train, and I think to put some guardrails on it now is probably too late. So. Hoping that hoping for the best, preparing for the worst is kind of the pathway for success, and hoping that some of the bright minds and the moral minds will come together and put some guardrails on this, because it will eventually be, synergistic with the human intelligence. I think, at least that's what my understanding is. The limited understanding that I have of where this is going.
I mean, for me, the idea that artificial intelligence, I look up something on my computer, and then the next thing I know, I'm getting ads on it. So I've entered data, and as a result, I guess I have done, is that supervised stuff without even meaning to, that I've told my computer, this is what I'm interested in. And so it then begins to populate all these ads. Is that artificial intelligence? Brianna, what do you think?
I think it is artificial intelligence, but the goal is not in your interest in that case. It's towards, a number of different variables. Like on Facebook, it would be how many minutes they can make you sit there scrolling your news feed, or how many times you click through an ad and actually purchase something. What you're a psychologist. You can appreciate.
No, it's worse. It's worse. I'm a psychiatrist.
Do not call him a psychologist.
I'm a psychiatrist.
Speaking from the psychological point of view.
Yes.
What's really interesting is a lot of these systems are constantly trending us towards what's most extreme. Us as humans, we like to look at the thing it's the car crash syndrome, right? Which is why social media is making us look at more and more extreme things here. So I really, it's why if we're talking about AI, you have to really ask yourself who's setting the inputs on this. These are very expensive systems to develop. Even deep learning, you're working with Google's APIs, right? You're working with, Amazon's Web3 technology. You've got to, I'm not going to run a backend that can calculate all these things. So, who is making those decisions? Who the profit is for? Like, that's not a secondary consideration here. It's a primary one. Like, look at cybersecurity. We know what good cybersecurity protocols are right now overall, but because the money men get involved, it's very expensive to do the right thing. So often we take shortcuts And the outcome of that is we have a lot of identity theft online and all kinds of scams, right? That's the result of these systems choosing to not do the right thing, but to do the things most profitable and easiest for them. I think when it comes to AI, if you're trying to determine what's a good input and what's a bad input, like y'all gave an example of basically the API callback with GPT-3, which is basically doing a context-sensitive analysis, looking at a very base reading of the words, saying, are these positive or do they seem negative to you? And if so, let's just flag them and get them through. That's a lot cheaper to do than having a human actually in that loop thinking about the context and giving a deeper analysis on it. So I think those profit motives are really going to hold us back on moving this forward.
So what, Jason, do you want to add something?
Oh, I had a question about the moral code that's kind of related to what Brianna was talking about with the who's setting the input. I didn't read the whole book. I've only read the first little bit, but I was really interested in the seeker dust. That basically, you shoot it out of a cannon. You got all these little nanites photographing things from every possible angle to reconstruct a room. A lot of privacy concerns with that. In your book, did you explore people who may have exploited that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. Go ahead, Lois.
That is part of the tension, is that in the wrong hands, that surveillance would be horrible. And there are characters that want to do horrible things with it. And what are the precautions that are needed in order to protect changes to be able to be made if someone were able to take over the system? And sometimes that could be quite drastic. So it is an element of, hey, here's some really cool stuff. There's a scene where characters go and they look at the development of at a museum, an exhibit about the atomic bomb. And the discussion is, just because we can build it, does that mean we should? And, they battle with that because the two people have very different opinions about it. And one saying, well, look at all of the things that were developed because we, played with radiation. Play being a horrible word to put there, but that's, part of the perspective. So yeah, there are bad people are going to do bad things with technology. And my objective was, let's set, instead of all science fiction being, racing to dystopia, let's look at what could happen if we do this right. A lot of science fiction is motivational for aspiring engineers, that those young kids that read it and they, Snow Crash inspired Google Earth and Star Trek inspired flip phones. There's a whole series of inspiration. Yeah, there's some aspirational elements to it, definitely. It's science fiction. I also say, I don't have any misogyny in the tech world that these female engineers are working with, because it's science fiction. It's not a documentary.
Brianna's smiling because this affects her personally. Folks, I so appreciate Brianna. You're going to be coming on the show again at some point?
Just call me up. If my schedule's free, I can do it.
That's great.
Excellent.
Jason, you too, I hope. And Lois and Ross, welcome back anytime. I hope the book really takes off. It's so important. Mark, you and I will be chatting. Thanks, everybody. Good night. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Just a show